How does a man spend his whole life being told his grandfather died broke, only to get a certified letter at 48 saying, "Long-term trust activation for designated grandchild"? Why did my grandfather leave money growing for 4 decades, and why did he choose me, the failure of the family everyone used as a punchline? What I read in that letter made me see my parents, my siblings, and my whole childhood in a completely different way. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Daniel Hayes, and I turned 48 2 weeks ago. I did not have a party. I worked the night shift at the distribution center, counted pallets until my eyes hurt, then went home and tried not to think about the bills stacked on my kitchen table. That was my normal life. Work, pay just enough, fall a little behind, promise myself that next month would be better. That night started like many others. I was in the warehouse around midnight, with the buzzing lights and the sound of forklifts beeping in the distance. My job is simple to explain but hard on the body. I supervise inventory on one section of the floor. I check numbers, sign off deliveries, handle small crises when a pallet goes missing or an order is wrong. People at work say I'm solid and calm. They tell me I keep things from falling apart. I appreciate it, but I also know my pay stub does not care about those words. Near the end of the shift, my supervisor walked by and thanked me for covering someone else's mistake earlier in the week. He told me he wished he had 3 more people like me. I smiled and said I was just doing my job. Inside, I was thinking about how overtime had been cut again, and how my rent would swallow most of my next check. I knew I would have to choose between paying the electric bill on time and paying the full balance on my credit card. When my shift ended, it was early morning, still dark. I walked out to my car, feeling the familiar ache in my knees. My car is old, like everything else in my life, but it starts most days. That morning, when I turned the key, there was a grinding sound that made my stomach sink. The engine finally caught, but a warning light blinked at me. I stared at it and thought about what it might cost. Instead of going straight home, I drove to a cheap tire and repair shop near the warehouse. I sat in the waiting area while a mechanic in a stained shirt checked my car. He came back and told me one of the belts was nearly gone and that if I did not replace it, I might end up stuck on the side of the road soon. He gave me the price. It was more than I wanted to hear, but still less than a new car. I nodded and told him to do it. When it was time to pay, I slid my card across the counter and watched the little screen. The machine paused for a second that felt very long. The clerk gave me a quick look, the kind of look people give when they expect to see declined, but do not want to say anything. Then the transaction went through. He relaxed and told me to have a good day. I said thanks and walked back to my car, feeling like I had just dodged a bullet. I drove home, slept for a few hours, and woke up to a message from my younger sister, Lila. She reminded me that we were meeting that evening at her house for our mother's 70th birthday dinner. She added that it would be nice if I could bring a dessert. I looked in my fridge and saw half a carton of milk and some leftover noodles. Store-bought dessert meant more money. Still, I did not want to be the difficult one, so I replied that I would bring something. By early evening, I was standing on the front step of Lila's suburban house, holding a plastic box with a supermarket cake inside. Her place looked like a picture from a catalog. White fence, big windows, nice car in the driveway. She and her husband both have decent jobs. My older brother, Mark, pulled up a few minutes after me in his truck with his business logo on the side. He runs a home renovation company. He likes to tell everyone he is his own boss, even when he complains about clients not paying on time. Inside, the table was set with fancy plates and candles. Mom sat at the head of the table, smiling and fussing over her grandchildren. Dad sat next to her, already on his second beer. Lila walked around, taking photos with her phone for social media, talking about the decorations and the food. She hugged me and said I looked tired, in that half-kind, half-critical way she has. Mark clapped me on the shoulder and asked if the warehouse was still paying me in peanuts. During dinner, the same pattern came back, like it always does. Mark talked loudly about his latest renovation job. He said he had a client with a huge kitchen island and how he might be hired to redo their whole house. Lila talked about a work conference and how she might get a promotion. They asked a few questions about my job, but they did not want a real answer. When I tried to explain a tricky inventory problem I had solved, Mark cut me off and joked that counting boxes was not that hard. My parents did not correct him. Dad laughed and shook his head, saying that at least I was dependable. He said some people are not meant to take risks. Mom said she was just glad I had something stable, even if it did not pay much. She added that Lila and Mark had always been the ones with ambition. I took a sip of water and told myself not to argue. I have learned over the years that talking back only leads to more comments about my sensitive nature. At some point, the conversation moved, like it often did, to the past and to my grandfather, Walter. Someone mentioned the old house that my parents still live in. Dad talked about the repairs it needed and how hard it had been to keep it all these years. Mom shook her head and repeated her usual line about how her father had left them with nothing but bills. She said he had been stubborn, never trusted banks, and that when he died, they had to scrape together money just to bury him. I remember Walter differently. I remember him as a quiet man who fixed things and smelled like oil and sawdust. I remember visiting him in his garage as a child, watching him repair a radio or sharpen tools. But I have heard my mother's version of the story for 40 years, so often that it almost replaced my own memories. According to her, he ruined the family finances and abandoned them by being careless. Every time she spoke about him, she made him sound like a warning sign, not a person. After dinner, we all went to a chain restaurant nearby for dessert and drinks. Lila said it was easier than cleaning up more dishes. The kids watched videos on their phones while the adults ordered coffee and dessert. The mood was light. Mark ordered a round of drinks for the table and told the server not to worry, that we were celebrating. He always acts generous in front of others. When the bill came, it sat in the middle of the table for a moment. Everyone looked at it, then looked away. Mark cleared his throat and said that since he had paid last time, it would be nice if someone else took this one. Lila said she had just bought new clothes for the kids and that her card was hurting. My parents looked at each other and then at me. Mom said that I hardly ever do anything for myself and that it might make me feel good to treat everyone. I knew how much money was in my account. I knew the car belt repair had taken a big bite that morning. Still, all their eyes were on me. I heard Mark joke that I should at least do this much for Mom on her big birthday. I could have argued. I could have said I did not have it. Instead, I nodded, picked up the bill, and handed over my card. Again, I watched the little screen like it was a judge. Again, there was a delay. This time, it felt worse, because I had an audience. Lila was already talking about posting a group photo later. Mark was hitting Dad on the arm and laughing about something else. I was the only one paying attention to the slow blinking of the card reader. When it finally approved the charge, my shoulders relaxed. No one else noticed. They just stood up and started talking about where to go next. On the way out, Mom hugged me and thanked me, but even that had a twist. She told me that moments like this showed I had a good heart, even if I never managed to get ahead in life. She said she worried about me being alone in my small apartment when I was older. Dad told me I should spend less on small things and save more, as if that was the problem. Mark joked that I could always move into their basement if things got too bad. I drove away from the restaurant in silence. The sky was dark again, and the streetlights cast yellow circles on the road. I felt the weight of the evening pressing on me, the old story repeating in my head. I was the weak one, the one who never quite made it, the one who could be pushed into paying because I did not want a scene. I told myself that at least Mom had a nice birthday. That is how I always comforted myself, by telling myself that my discomfort kept the peace. On the way home, I remembered a small detail. There had been a slip in my mailbox a day earlier, a notice that I had missed a delivery that needed a signature. At the time, I had been too tired to deal with it. Now, since I was already out, I decided to stop by the post office. It was close to closing time, but the lights were still on. Inside, the clerk asked for my ID and disappeared into the back. He returned with a stiff white envelope and a small electronic pad for my signature. The envelope was heavier than normal mail. It had my full name, Daniel Hayes, typed neatly on the front. In the corner, I saw the name of a law firm I did not recognize and, below it, a small printed line. Estate of Walter Hayes. For a moment, I did not move. I just stood there, holding the envelope, feeling the paper against my fingers. I thought of my mother's voice saying for the 1,000th time that her father had left nothing. I thought of the way my brother and sister rolled their eyes whenever I asked questions about him. The clerk asked if everything was okay. I said yes, pushed the envelope into my jacket, and walked out into the cool night air. In the parking lot, under a flickering streetlight, I slid the envelope partly out and saw a line through the small plastic window. It had a formal phrase on it, something about long-term trust activation for designated grandchild. I did not fully understand what it meant in that moment. I only knew it had my name on it and my grandfather's name on it, together. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a new photo in the family group chat. It was Mark, Lila, and my parents at the restaurant bar, raising their glasses without me. The caption under the picture said that they were thankful I had picked up the tab and that I was a good little brother. I stood there in the dark parking lot, envelope in one hand, that message glowing on the screen in the other, and for the first time in a very long time, something inside me did not just sag and accept it. It paused. When I got back to my apartment that night, I did not open the envelope. I set it on the kitchen table next to the stack of bills and the empty cake container I had brought home from Lila's. The apartment was quiet, only the hum of the fridge and the distant sound of a neighbor's TV through the wall. I made myself a cheap sandwich and stared at the envelope while I ate as if it might move on its own. The line about a long-term trust for a grandchild kept repeating in my head, along with my mother's voice saying there had been nothing. I picked it up once, turned it over, and ran my thumb along the sealed edge. The paper felt thick and official. I imagined all the ways it could be a mistake. Maybe it was about some old debt. Maybe it was a notice that there really was nothing, just legal closure that came late. I told myself that if there had been money, my parents would have known. They would have told us. That was what I had believed for 40 years. I put the envelope down again. My eyes burned from the long day. I decided to shower and sleep before I did anything else. Lying in bed in the small dark room, I thought about my grandfather, Walter. I saw him in my mind the way he looked when I was a child, sitting on a stool in his garage. He was not big or loud. He moved slowly, with care. He wore the same old jacket most days and kept a small pencil behind his ear. When I was around 8, I used to spend afternoons there when my parents were busy. He would let me hand him tools and explain what he was doing in simple words. He did not talk much, but when he did, he spoke like he was teaching, not like he was judging. I remembered the way the light came through the dirty window onto his workbench and the smell of oil and sawdust that clung to everything. He showed me how to fix a broken radio once. He told me that sometimes things looked dead, but were only stuck in the wrong place. He said that if you took them apart carefully and put them back the right way, they could work again. He put my small hands on the screws and let me open the back. It felt like magic when sound came out of the speaker at the end. Those memories became softer over time because of the way my parents talked about him. After he died, my mother described him as careless with money and stubborn with everyone. She said he never believed in banks, that he kept cash in strange places, that he refused to listen when people tried to help him. She repeated that when he passed, there had been nothing but unpaid bills. She said they had to sell things and borrow just to get through. My father agreed. He called Walter a warning and told us not to be like him. I was in the living room the day they told us he had died. I remember Mom sitting on the couch with red eyes, saying that her father was gone. I went to ask if I could go to the funeral, and she told me it would be better if I stayed at home with a neighbor because there was no room and no money for extra travel. Later, I heard my parents arguing quietly in the kitchen about who would pay for what. My father said he did not owe Walter anything. My mother said she did not want to be embarrassed in front of her relatives. At the time, I did not understand all of it. I just knew they were angry and stressed. As I got older, whenever I showed interest in building things or starting a small project, my father would bring up Walter. He would say that my grandfather thought he could build his way into fortune and that he had ended up with nothing. He said that it was better to take a steady job, even if it did not pay much, than to end up like that. When I was a teenager and talked about maybe learning a trade or starting a little repair business, he reminded me that I was not business material. He said I did not handle stress well and that I should look for something simple, so I did. After some short jobs and a failed attempt at community college, I ended up at the distribution center. At first, I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would stay a year or two, save, and then move on. Years turned into decades. Promotions passed me by quietly. I watched people come and go. Sometimes, when I tightened a strap on a pallet or fixed a minor glitch in the system, I thought of my grandfather's hands on that old radio and wondered if I had taken the wrong path. Then I would hear my mother complaining about bills or my brother mocking some failed handyman he knew, and I would push those thoughts down. The next afternoon, my alarm woke me up for my shift. The envelope was still on the table. I made coffee and stared at it again. I almost opened it then. Instead, I slid it into my work bag. I told myself that I could use my break at the warehouse to read it quietly. Maybe the change of place would make it easier. I turned off the light and headed out. At the warehouse, the routine took over. The noise, the bright lights, the constant movement made it easy to forget about personal problems for a while. I checked in with the team, looked over the schedule, signed off some deliveries. My coworker Jamal came up beside me while we waited for a truck to dock. He is younger than me by more than 10 years, but he treats me with a kind of respect I do not see at home. He asked how the birthday dinner had gone. I told him in short lines that it had been the usual. Fancy table, jokes at my expense, me paying for dessert. I did not complain in a loud way. I just described it. He listened, then he shook his head. He said it sounded like they used me. He reminded me that I was the one always switching shifts to help them, always taking calls about small emergencies, always lending money even when I did not have much. He said he did not understand why I let them do that. I shrugged and said that family was family and that I was used to it. I said that at least they were not bad people, just a little selfish. Jamal looked at me for a long second. He told me that just because something was normal did not mean it was okay. He said it was strange to him that the guy who could keep an entire section of the warehouse running was treated like a joke in his own family. He did not say it to attack me. He said it like he was describing something broken that could be fixed. His words stayed with me through the rest of the shift. On my break, I went to the small staff room with my lunch. I took the envelope out of my bag and laid it on the table. My hands were still dusty from moving boxes. I cleaned them on a napkin and thought about opening it again. A couple of coworkers came in, talking loudly about sports, and the room filled with their voices and the smell of reheated food. I felt suddenly exposed. I put the envelope back into my bag. I told myself I would open it at home where no one could see my face. After the shift, when I drove home, the sun was just starting to come up. The streets were quiet. My eyes felt heavy. At the first red light, I saw a new message on my phone screen from the family group chat. Lila had sent a link to a photo album of the birthday dinner. The preview showed my parents smiling, my brother raising his glass, my sister tilting her head just right for the camera. I was in the corner of one shot, slightly blurred, looking down at the bill. The caption talked about wonderful children and how grateful my mother was. There was no mention of the fight over who paid, no hint of the small cold knot I had carried home. Back in my apartment, I put on a pot of coffee, even though I was tired. I needed my head clear. I took a shower and changed into clean clothes. Then I sat at the table, the envelope in front of me, my bills in a messy pile off to the side. The morning light through the window was pale and flat. I picked up the envelope again, feeling the raised texture of the law firm's logo with my thumb. I thought about my grandfather in his garage, about the way he had handed me the pocket knife and called me patient. Instead of tearing it open, I opened a drawer and took out an old shoebox. Inside were small pieces of my life with him. A faded photo of us in the garage, a small metal car he had given me, the pocket knife wrapped in an old handkerchief. I had kept these things even when I moved around, even when money was tight, even when I had thrown away other things. I held the photo and tried to match that man to the one my mother described. The two images did not fit well together. I set the photo next to the envelope. For the first time, I allowed the thought that my parents might have been wrong about him. Not just mistaken, but actively wrong. Maybe they had reasons, maybe they had their own hurts. Still, the idea felt strange and heavy. My whole life, when something did not make sense with money, they blamed Walter. When my father was short on rent when I was young, he said it was because he had to clean up Walter's mess. When my mother needed help with medical bills years later, she reminded me that no one had helped her when her own father died. I made another cup of coffee and sat there thinking until my phone buzzed on the table. The screen showed an unknown number. Normally, I let unknown numbers go to voicemail, but something made me pick it up. The voice on the other end was an older woman, a little shaky but familiar somehow. She introduced herself as Ruth, my grandfather's sister. I had not heard her voice in many years. She said she had heard from someone at the old law firm that they had finally sent a letter to Walter's chosen grandchild. She asked if I had received anything like that. My eyes went to the envelope on the table. She went on to say that she had always wondered when this day would come and that she hoped I would not let anyone rush me into signing anything. She said there was more to the story of my grandfather and my parents than I had been told. As she spoke, I felt that same pause inside me widen. The life I thought I understood began to feel thin, like a surface that might crack. I told her, in a quiet voice, that yes, I had received a letter. She asked if we could meet somewhere to talk. I agreed to meet Ruth the next day. My voice sounded strange to me on the phone, like it belonged to someone else. She suggested a small cafe not far from my apartment. I said that would work. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the envelope, the photo of my grandfather, and my cold coffee. I did not sleep well that day. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind went in circles. I thought about the way my parents talked about Walter. I thought about the soft, careful man in my memory. I thought about the hard line of text I had seen through the envelope window. My body was tired from work, but my head stayed awake. By the time I walked into the cafe, I felt like I had been awake for days. The place was quiet, with small tables and the smell of burnt coffee. I saw Ruth right away. She had the same sharp eyes I remembered from childhood photos. She waved me over with a small, careful motion, as if she was not sure I would really come. We sat across from each other with steaming cups between us. For a moment, we just looked at each other. She told me that I looked like Walter, especially around the eyes. She said that she had thought about calling me many times over the years, but always stopped herself. She said that family fights get sticky, and she had not wanted to make things worse. Then she began to tell me her version of what had happened all those years ago. She said that Walter had owned a small workshop and some rental property. She said it was not a fortune, but it was something solid. She told me that as he got older, he started talking about what would happen when he died. She said he had wanted to set things up in a careful way, so she had gone with him to see a lawyer. Ruth said that my parents had wanted him to do something different. She said there had been arguments at family dinners, quiet at first, then louder. She said my father and mother had wanted part of the property in their own names right away, to help them with money problems. She said Walter had refused. She said he had told them that he would not turn his old age into one long fight over who owned what. She told me that the last big argument had been ugly. She said my father had shouted that Walter did not trust his own daughter. She said my mother had cried and said she was tired of feeling like a beggar. Ruth said that after that, Walter had pulled away. He had stopped coming to big gatherings. He had seen her and a few others, but he had stayed away from my parents. While she talked, I felt heat behind my eyes, but I sat still. I asked, in a quiet voice, if there had been anything left when he died. She looked at me for a long time and said that there had been assets, yes. She said she had not known the details because the lawyer had not been allowed to share them with her. She said Walter had told her that he was setting aside something for a grandchild who understands patience. She said he had not told her which grandchild. Ruth said that years after his death, she had heard rumors that some family members had tried to get the lawyer to change things. She said the lawyer had refused, and that was the last she knew. She told me that when the old law firm reached out to her recently to confirm my phone number, she had guessed that the time had come for that plan, whatever it was. She reached across the table and put her hand near mine, not touching, but close. She told me that my parents saw the past through their own pain. She said they had felt poor and abandoned, and in their mind that meant Walter had left nothing or had failed them. She told me that their story was not the whole story, and that I should be careful with anything they put in front of me now. I told her, in simple words, about the envelope. I said I had seen my name and my grandfather's name together, and a phrase about a long-term trust. I said I had not opened it yet. She nodded and told me that whatever was inside, I should not sign away anything without someone neutral looking at it. She said she did not want to see me pushed into something while thinking I was helping the family. We sat in silence for a moment. The cafe music played softly in the background. I realized my hands were curled into fists on the table. I forced them to relax. Ruth told me that, in her eyes, Walter had been stubborn, but not careless. She said he had trusted time more than people. She said she thought he had wanted to protect someone from being controlled by others. After we said goodbye, I walked out into the afternoon light feeling like the air had changed. I did not go straight home. Instead, I drove to my parents' house. It was not planned. My hands just turned the wheel. I told myself I only wanted to see them, to hear their version again with fresh ears. Deep down, I think I wanted to test something. The old Hayes house looked the same as always from the outside. White paint peeling a little, the same old porch swing creaking in the breeze. Inside, nothing had changed either. The same furniture, the same pictures on the walls. Mom was in the kitchen, moving slowly, and Dad was in his chair. Mark's truck was in the driveway. Lila's car was there too. I realized they had all gathered without telling me. When I stepped into the dining room, there was a stack of papers on the table. Mark stood next to them, with a pen balanced between his fingers. Lila scrolled on her phone. My mother looked nervous and strangely excited. My father had the stiff body posture he used when he was trying to look calm and in charge. They told me, in soft voices at first, that they had been talking about the house. They said it was getting hard to afford the rising property taxes and maintenance. They said a bank officer had suggested a new refinancing plan. Mark pushed the stack of papers toward me and said that there was a small issue with the title from years ago, something about my name being on a record, and that it would be easier if I signed a form to clear it. I asked what exactly the papers would do. Mark rolled his eyes and told me that it was just paperwork to put the house fully in Mom and Dad's names, so the bank would be happy. Lila chimed in with a light tone and said that this was my chance to finally do something useful for the family. My father said that he did not understand all the legal terms, but that the bank had said it was standard. My mother added that I should trust them because they would never do anything to hurt me. While they spoke, I looked at the papers but did not pick them up. I saw a lot of text, small print, and highlighted sections. I saw my name in one place and my parents' names in others. I felt a slow pressure building in my chest, like something heavy was being pushed onto it. Part of me wanted to do what I had always done, sign, smile, and walk away. That part said it was easier to give in than to ask hard questions. But Ruth's words were still in my ears. Jamal's voice from the warehouse was there too. And my own memory of my grandfather's careful hands hovered over all of it. I thought about the envelope in my bag, about the phrase through the plastic window. I thought about how many times I had been told that there had been nothing left, and how hard they were pushing now for my signature on something tied to the house, so I did something different. I told them that I needed time to read the papers. I said I wanted to understand what they meant before I signed anything. Mark laughed in a sharp way and asked since when I was a lawyer. Lila said I was being dramatic, that it was just a form. My father said that this was exactly the kind of overthinking that held me back in life. My mother's face hardened. She said that after everything they had done for me, it hurt that I did not trust them. Their words stung. They knew exactly where to press. My whole life, they had used guilt and shame to move me like a piece on a board. For a moment, I almost reached for the pen. Then I remembered the look on Ruth's face in the cafe. I remembered how she had said that family stories can be wrong. I saw my own signature on those papers in my mind and felt a kind of future closing up. I pushed the papers back across the table instead. I said I would not sign anything, not today. I said I wanted to have someone neutral look at them first. The room went silent. Then my father's voice rose. He said that I was being ungrateful, that they had given me a roof when I was between apartments, that they had helped with my car once years ago. My mother started to cry, saying that she did not understand why I wanted to make life harder for them. Mark called me stubborn and said that banks do not wait forever. I stood there, listening to all of it, feeling strangely calm. I did not yell back. I did not try to explain myself in long speeches. I simply repeated that I would not sign that day. Then I picked up my bag and left. Behind me, I heard Lila say something about always having to handle things herself. My mother's voice followed me down the hallway, soft and broken, saying that she did not recognize me anymore. In the driveway, I sat in my car for a while, hands on the wheel, heart beating hard but steady. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope again. It felt heavier than before. I thought about waiting, about dragging this out. Then I pictured Mark's face as he leaned over those papers, already planning where the money from a new loan would go. I pictured my parents telling everyone later that I had finally done the right thing and signed if I gave in. I opened the envelope right there in the car. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the thick stack of paper. There was a cover letter with my name, my full legal name, spelled correctly. There were more pages behind it. I started to read. I will not lie and say I understood every term. Some parts read like another language, but I understood enough. I saw my grandfather's name. I saw words about a long-term trust. I saw mention of one designated grandchild. I saw timelines and dates that matched my age. As I read, a feeling went through me that I had not felt before. It was not joy, it was not anger, exactly. It was something like a heavy curtain being pulled back. I realized, slowly and then, all at once, that my parents' story about Walter had never been complete. I realized that my place in this family, the weak one, the one who owes, might not be the fixed thing I had believed it was. I kept reading until the lines started to blur, then put the papers down on the passenger seat. I sat in silence, listening to my own breathing. Outside, the familiar street of my childhood looked different, like someone had changed the light. The house where my parents lived was no longer just their house in my mind. It was something tied to these pages, to decisions made long before I was old enough to understand them. I knew then that I needed help, not the kind of help my family offered, with guilt attached. I needed someone who could explain what this all meant without wanting a piece of it. I looked at the law firm's name at the top of the letter and saw a number to call. My finger hovered over my phone screen for a second, then pressed. The receptionist at the firm spoke in a calm, practiced tone. I explained who I was and what letter I had received. She said that the lawyer who handled my grandfather's matters still worked there and that they could schedule a meeting. She gave me a time 2 days later. I wrote it down on the back of an old receipt. When I hung up, I felt my shoulders drop a little, as if some weight had shifted. Later that week, I put on my one good shirt and walked into the law firm's lobby with the envelope and its contents in a folder. The floor was polished, and the walls were lined with framed documents and photos. People in suits moved around me, talking quietly. As I stood there waiting for the receptionist to notice me, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message in the family group chat from Lila. She had written that I should not worry, that she would get me to sign the house papers at the next family dinner, because I always gave in eventually. I looked at the words on the screen, then at the folder in my hand, and for the first time in my life, I knew that what she believed about me was about to be wrong. The receptionist called my name and asked me to take a seat on a leather chair near the wall. I held the folder on my knees, pressing the edge into my fingers to keep them from shaking. After a few minutes, a woman in a dark suit came out, introduced herself as the lawyer handling my grandfather's estate, and led me down a quiet hallway. Her office was lined with shelves and had a large window that looked over the city. She asked me to sit and lay the documents on the table between us. She started by asking what I already knew about Walter's finances and his relationship with my parents. I told her the version I had been given my whole life, that he had died with nothing, that there had been only debts, and that my parents had struggled because of it. I said I had learned from Ruth that there had been more to the story. The lawyer listened without interrupting. After I finished, she sighed and said that family stories and legal facts often did not match. She explained, in slow, careful language, that many years ago my grandfather had set up something for one grandchild. She said it was designed to last for decades and to become active when that grandchild reached a certain age. She used terms I had never heard before, but she always followed them with simple descriptions. She said the intention had been to protect that person from being pushed around and to make sure the money was not swallowed by other people's debts or bad choices. She told me that grandchild was me. Hearing it from her, in that calm office, felt different from reading it alone in my car. The words hit a little deeper. I asked why no one had told me sooner. She explained that the structure of the arrangement did not allow early release and that there had been specific instructions about secrecy. She said that some family members had tried to get information and even challenged the plan years ago, but they had not been successful. She did not name names, but she did not have to. I could guess. She told me that the documents I had were only part of the picture. She had other files in her system, notes, court records, letters from my grandfather to the firm. She said she could not show me everything right then, but she could outline the situation. She explained that there were investments, property interests, and conditions tied to behavior. She said the core idea was simple. When I reached 48, I would have choices about what to do with these assets, as long as I met certain basic rules that my grandfather had set. I asked her, in a quiet voice, if the house my parents lived in was part of this. She nodded and said that the house had been placed under the umbrella of that plan long ago. She said my parents had been allowed to live there under specific terms. She added that attempts to change the title or take on big new loans were restricted. She said that, recently, flagged activity around the property had triggered a review. That was why the firm had moved to contact me now. Sitting there, I felt like I was looking at a map of my life, but for the first time I was seeing the real borders. All the times my parents had complained about being trapped by the house, all the times they had said there was nothing in my grandfather's name, suddenly had another layer. It did not make their feelings less real, but it made their words less true. The lawyer told me that I did not need to decide everything that day. She said my main task now was to understand that I had rights and that I should not sign any documents that touched on Walter's assets without advice. She asked if anyone had put papers in front of me recently. I told her about the refinancing forms my family had wanted me to sign. She frowned and made a note. She said it sounded like they were trying to move the house without explaining my position. We spent the rest of the meeting going through general options, not details. She said I could choose to keep the existing structure, or adjust it within legal limits, or activate certain clauses that would change who controlled what. She did not push me in any direction. She only repeated that whatever I chose had to be my decision, not something done under pressure. Before I left, she gave me a card with her direct number and told me she would prepare a clearer summary for me in plain language. When I stepped back into the hallway, the noise of the office felt far away. I rode the elevator down to the street and stood there for a moment, watching people walk past. They all looked busy, focused on their own lives. I felt like I had been handed a secret that no one else could see. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Mark, asking if I had had time to think about the house papers and saying that the bank was waiting. I did not answer. Instead, I drove to a branch of the bank that the lawyer had mentioned. The advisor there had been expecting me. The lobby smelled like polished wood and printer ink. The advisor, a woman with a calm voice, took me into a small office and went over numbers on her screen. She told me the rough value of the fund that had grown over the years. She did not give exact figures in the air, but she showed me enough to make me understand. It was more money than I had imagined. It was not billionaire money, but it was enough to change a life, especially a life like mine. I tried to imagine that kind of security, and found it hard. For so long, my brain had been trained to work in small amounts. Paycheck to paycheck, $10 here, $50 there. The idea that there was something behind my name, building quietly for decades, felt unreal. The advisor spoke about projected growth, tax rules, and income options. My head started to spin. I asked her to slow down and explain it like I was a beginner. She smiled and said that was not a problem. She said that patience was more important than knowledge in situations like this. After I left the bank, I did not go home right away. I drove to the cemetery where my grandfather was buried. I had not been there since I was a child, maybe once with my parents. I had to ask the office for directions. When I finally found his stone, it was simple, a little worn. I stood there for a long time without knowing what to say. In the end, I spoke out loud, even though no one was there. I told him that I had found out about what he did. I said I was sorry that I had believed the half story about him for so long. I admitted that I had repeated it to people, sometimes to explain why we had struggled. I told him that I remembered his garage, his steady hands, and the way he mentioned patience like it was a tool. I said that I understood now that he had not abandoned us in the way I had been told. He had just refused to be forced into someone else's plan. Then I said something that surprised me. I told him that I did not plan to use what he left to punish everyone around me just because I could. I said I would not play the same game my family had played with guilt and control. But I also said I was done letting them move me like furniture. I promised that I would not sign anything blind again. Back in my apartment, I cleared space on the small table. I pushed my unpaid bills to one side and took out a notebook. I drew simple headings on the first page, things I had paid for my family, times they had pressured me, words they had used when I hesitated. It felt strange to write it all down. For years, I had told myself that I was just helping, just being a good son and brother. Seeing it on paper made it look different. It was a record. I went through my email and bank statements and printed anything that showed money flowing from me to them. Electric bills, car repairs, small loans that had never been repaid. I screenshot messages where they had asked for help and where they had joked about me being soft. I did not do it with a vengeful feeling. I did it like I was putting the parts of a machine on a table to see how it worked. I bought a cheap set of folders from a supermarket and labeled them by hand. One for the house, one for my grandfather's paperwork, one for proof of what I had covered, one for notes from the lawyer and the bank. I slid each piece of paper into the right place. The act itself calmed me. At work, I am used to sorting, labeling, and tracking. This was not so different, except that this time, the material was my own life. While I worked, my phone kept lighting up. Lila sent me a long message saying that Mom was stressed about the refinance and that it would be a big weight off her shoulders if I just signed. She wrote that I should not make things difficult and that I should remember everything they had done for me. Mark sent shorter, sharper messages about deadlines and banks and the danger of waiting. I put the phone face down and kept filing. At one point, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened. Her voice was soft and trembling. She said she did not understand why I was dragging my feet. She said she and my father had always tried their best. She reminded me of the time they had let me move back home between apartments years ago, and she said I was making her feel like a bad mother. For a moment, the familiar guilt washed over me. I almost picked up the phone to call back and apologize, to say I would sign anything she wanted. Instead, I walked to the small corner of the living room where I keep an old second-hand printer and a cheap desk. I looked at the folders lined up on the surface. I thought about Walter's careful writing, about Ruth's worried eyes, about the steady tone of the lawyer's voice when she told me that the plan was designed to protect, not trap. I looked down at my hands and saw the small scars and calluses from years of lifting boxes and fixing small problems for other people. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing a simple summary of everything that had happened in the last weeks. The letter, Ruth's call, the meeting at the law firm, the bank visit, the refinance papers at the family house. I did not add emotion. I just wrote what happened, date by date. When I was done, I printed it and slid it into a fresh folder labeled with the current month and year. As I stepped back, the printer started up again on its own cue, pages feeding through with that rough mechanical sound. The light in the room was dim. The only bright spot was the laptop screen. On it, a small notification popped up from my calendar, one I had set after the first lawyer meeting and almost forgotten about. It reminded me of an appointment in 2 weeks with the firm, marked with a simple title I had chosen in a tired moment. Review of the Trust. The 2 weeks between that calendar reminder and the next meeting with the lawyer passed slowly and quickly at the same time. On the surface, my days looked the same. I went to work, counted pallets, fixed small mistakes, drank bad coffee in the break room. Underneath, everything was different. I carried the knowledge of the trust with me the way you carry a secret bruise. It did not show on the outside, but I felt it whenever anything bumped against my old habits. At the warehouse, the mood started to shift around the same time. Rumors about cutbacks moved through the staff like a chill breeze. People whispered in corners, talked about budgets and corporate changes. One morning, my supervisor called me into the small glass-walled office near the loading docks. He looked tired. He told me that the company was changing some policies, that overtime would be even tighter, that benefits might be reduced. He said he knew it was not what anyone wanted to hear. He talked about numbers from the top, decisions made far away. Then he added that I should think about my long-term plans, because people who had been there for years could not count on staying forever. He did not say I was in danger right now. He only said that the ground could move under all of us without warning. I listened and nodded. A year before, that talk would have filled me with raw panic. Now there was fear, but there was something else too, a sense that I was not completely trapped anymore. After the shift, I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel and thought about what my supervisor had said. I thought about how I had built my whole adult life on the idea of staying safe, staying small, not taking risks. I had trusted the idea of a steady job more than I had trusted myself. And yet, here I was, with the steady job wobbling and a different kind of structure waiting for me, one built by someone who had been called careless all my life. A few days later, I went back to the law firm for our follow-up meeting. This time, I felt slightly less like an outsider in a strange building. The receptionist recognized me and called the lawyer's assistant. In the conference room, there was a thick folder with my name on it. The lawyer had prepared her plain language summary, like she had promised. She slid it across the table to me and walked me through each section. She did not read legal phrases. She talked about choices. She spoke about what it would mean if I kept everything as it was, what it would mean if I used some of the powers that my grandfather had written into the plan, and what it would mean if I made new arrangements for parts of the assets. Each path had consequences. None of them were simple. She did not push me toward any one answer. She only asked me more than once what I actually wanted. It was a hard question. For years, my wants had been small and immediate. Pay the bill, keep the job, avoid conflict. My picture of the future had stopped just outside the next month. Now I had to think further. I told her I wanted security, but not just for myself. I said I wanted to honor the kind of person my grandfather had been in my memory, not the version of him that had been thrown at me as a warning. Without going into the fine print, she pointed out certain tools that matched those wishes. There were ways to make sure the house situation was settled in a clear, final way. There were ways to direct some of the money towards something concrete and helpful that would not be in the hands of my parents or siblings. There were ways to protect myself from future pressure, ways that would mean I did not have to fight every argument all over again every year. She reminded me that once some decisions were made, they would be hard to undo. She asked again if I was sure I wanted to change the status quo. For a moment, I saw my mother's face in my mind, crying in the dining room. I heard my father listing what they had done for me. I heard Lila's jokes, Mark's sharp voice about deadlines. Then I remembered the stack of unpaid bills on my table, the long years of quietly covering costs, the photo of me in the corner of the birthday picture, staring at the bill while everyone else smiled. I told the lawyer that I was sure. My voice did not shake when I said it. She nodded slowly and said that in that case she would prepare the necessary documents. She explained that some would go to the court, some to the bank, some to agencies that handled property records. She said that once they were processed, certain structures would shift by themselves. She asked if I wanted her present if I chose to explain anything to my family. I said I did not want a dramatic, staged confrontation in her office. I thought for a moment and added that there was an upcoming family event that might serve as a place to make things clear. On the drive home, I thought about that event. It was my parents' upcoming 50th anniversary party. Lila had been talking about it for weeks in the family chat. She wanted something big and glossy, with a nice venue and photos that would get a lot of likes. She had shared pictures of hotel banquet halls and lists of decorations. She had also sent me a private message, asking how much money I could put toward it. That night, I called her. I kept my voice even. I told her I could help with the cost of the hall. I said that my job had a connection to a place that gave discounts on rentals if the contract was in the right name. That was not fully true, but it sounded believable. I offered to handle the booking myself. She was happy to have one less task. She said that was perfect, that she could focus on the fun parts, like decorations and guests. She did not ask why I wanted the contract in my name. She assumed I was just trying to be useful. The next day, I went to the hotel she had liked most and met with the event manager. The woman showed me the room, a big hall with high ceilings and neutral walls. It was the kind of space that could become anything with the right lights and music. I walked slowly across the empty floor, imagining tables, a buffet, a microphone stand. I imagined my parents sitting at a head table, surrounded by family, smiling. I also imagined my siblings moving around the room, telling the old stories again, about how hard they had it, about the sacrifices they had made. The event manager laid out the contract on her desk. It included the date, the hours, the deposit, and who would be responsible for the rental. I read each line carefully. Years of being told I was slow for reading things like that had made me sensitive, but in that moment, I did not care how I looked. When I was sure I understood, I signed with my name. The manager slid me a copy and said she would email a digital version. She asked about the event and smiled when I said it was a 50th anniversary. She said it would be a beautiful night. Back home, I scanned the contract and forwarded it to the lawyer with a short note. I explained that the event would bring most of the family together and that I wanted everything important to be in place before that date. She replied that she understood and that they were already moving on the filings. She wrote that some of the processes would finish just before the party, if nothing slowed them down. In the days that followed, I kept living my usual routine, but now there was a second track running under everything. At the warehouse, I answered questions, trained a new hire, and walked the floor like always. At the same time, I made small calls on my breaks, responded to emails from the law firm and the bank, and signed digital forms when needed. I read each one twice. I did not rush. I did not show them to anyone at home. One afternoon, I was called into the Human Resources office. The HR manager explained more changes. There would be a freeze on pay raises. Some positions might be merged or cut later in the year. She said that my job was safe for now, but that nothing was guaranteed in the long term. She talked about understanding if people needed to look for other opportunities. I listened, thinking about how different this conversation would have felt a month earlier. It still worried me, but it did not feel like the end of my world anymore. When I left her office, I felt oddly lighter. At home, my table was no longer just a place for bills. It had become something like a small command center. The folders sat in a neat row, my grandfather's arrangements, the house history, my own records, notes from the lawyer and the bank, and now one more labeled with the name of the hotel and the date of the party. Inside that last one, I kept the contract, payment receipts, and a simple list of things I planned to bring that night. Sometimes late at night, I would sit down with that list and add small, practical items. Copies of certain papers, a small USB drive with selected files, notes for what I might say if I chose to speak. I did not write a big speech. I only wrote down a few points I did not want to forget in the heat of the moment. Facts, not insults. Dates, not old wounds. I told myself that I would not turn into the kind of person who lashes out and then regrets his own words. I wanted to be precise. My family, meanwhile, stayed the same on the surface. The group chat was full of talk about party themes, guest lists, and outfits. Lila sent photos of centerpieces she might buy. Mark bragged about some surprise he was planning for our parents, something loud and showy. My mother wrote about how blessed she felt, how she could not believe she had made it 50 years with my father. My father wrote short messages about how he just wanted good food and to see the kids happy. In private, the tone was different. Lila still tried to pressure me about the refinance, saying that the bank was asking questions and that delays made everyone look bad. Mark sent me a message that said he hoped I was not being influenced by outsiders about family matters. He wrote that real men handled things in-house and did not run to lawyers. My mother left me another voice message where she said that she did not want tension at the anniversary party, and that she hoped I would not bring up unpleasant topics. I answered those private messages with careful, short lines. I said that we would talk about serious issues after the party, not before. I said that I wanted the event to be about their marriage, not about paperwork. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I wanted them to walk into that hall with the old story still in their mouths, so that the contrast with what was coming would be clear. But I kept that to myself. In the final days before the event, I met once more with the lawyer and a representative from the company that managed the trust. This new person, a woman with a neat suit and a calm manner, went over the last steps. She confirmed that certain changes had been filed and accepted. She said that some property records would show new information as of that week. She mentioned that official notifications would also be sent out, but that I could choose when and how to mention them to my family. We talked briefly about the scholarship idea I had raised. I did not have all the details yet, but I knew I wanted some part of my grandfather's legacy to go toward helping people learn practical skills, the kind he had valued. The representative said that this was possible and that they could formalize it after the main changes were settled. She reminded me that I did not have to decide everything at once. I nodded. For now, just knowing that path existed was enough. On the day of the anniversary party, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky outside my window was a flat gray, the kind that could go either way, toward sun or rain. I made coffee and sat at the table, looking at the neat row of folders one more time. Then I opened the one for the party and checked its contents. Copies, notes, that small USB drive, the contract. Everything was in order. I dressed in the same suit I had worn to a few weddings and funerals. It was a little tight around the waist, but it still fit. In the mirror, I looked like the same man I had been a month before, a little tired, hair graying, lines around the eyes. Inside, I did not feel like the same man. There was a kind of stillness there I had not known before. Not numbness, more like focus. I loaded the box with my folders and a few other items into the trunk of my car, then drove to the hotel. The parking lot was half full already with early arrivals and staff cars. Inside, the banquet hall was decorated with white cloths, flowers, and golden balloons shaped like the number 50. Workers moved around adjusting chairs and checking sound equipment. As I stepped into the hall with my box in my arms, a woman in a charcoal suit approached me from the side. I recognized her as the trust company representative from the last meeting. She greeted me calmly and said she was glad we had connected in person. She asked if I had everything I needed. I said yes. She told me that all the filings were confirmed and that certain notifications had already gone out that morning. She looked me in the eye and asked, in a quiet voice, if I felt ready for what might happen once I spoke. I took a breath and said that I did not know how my family would react, but I knew I was done letting them write the whole story. She nodded and said that, in the end, facts have a way of holding steady even when people get loud. I set my box down on a small side table near the wall and looked over the empty tables, the waiting chairs, the microphone at the front. Soon, the room would be full of people talking, laughing, taking pictures. Soon, my parents would be sitting at that head table, listening to the same old stories. Soon, the story would shift. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. The screen showed a new message from Lila saying that they were on their way and asking if everything was ready. I typed a simple answer that everything was in place. Then I slid the phone back into my pocket, rested my hand for a moment on the lid of the box, and waited for the doors of the banquet hall to open. By the time everyone arrived, the hall was noise and light. My parents sat at the head table, holding hands. Mark gave a loud toast about starting with nothing. Lila filmed it for her followers, and my mother repeated her line about her father leaving her with no resources. People clapped. The representative stepped forward and asked for a moment on behalf of the estate of Walter Hayes. She introduced the lawyer, who opened a folder and read my grandfather's words about pulling back from his own daughter after she and her husband tried to force him to sign over assets. She read the line naming my patient grandson, Daniel, as the sole beneficiary of a long-term trust now active. Then she laid out the filings. The house title shifted, failed challenges dismissed, notice already recorded. I spoke briefly about the scholarship and my own boundaries, placed a ring of keys and stamped copies on the table, and listened as my family's phones began to vibrate.